Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely terrifying physics, physiology, and psychology that make underground survival the ultimate test of human endurance. We're going to look at the dark, utterly unforgiving world of cave exploration and break down exactly what happens when our natural curiosity collides with the Earth's most dangerous environments. And this really brings us to a fundamental paradox. Why do we willingly walk into the dark? Think about it. As humans, we have this deeply ingrained primal fear of the pitch black, of enclosed spaces, of being buried alive. Yet, at the same time, there's this almost magnetic allure to unexplored depths, right? It's that sheer thrill of stepping where literally no human has ever stepped before. But as we're about to see, the stakes in subterranean exploration are impossibly high. Because here's the harsh reality. Deep underground, a single mistake doesn't just cost you your life. It erases you. The subterranean environment is completely and utterly unforgiving. I mean, we are talking about total, absolute blackness and crushing geological pressure. Down there, the tiniest of errors, a wrong turn, a dropped flashlight, or just brushing off a weather report can turn instantly into a permanent grave. Section 1. The allure of the dark, the draw of the labyrinths. To put the sheer scale of this into perspective, think about the number 400 miles. That is the mapped length of Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Back in the mid to late 19th century, long before modern tech, thrill seekers would take guided tours of this massive system. But of course, some adventurous souls just weren't satisfied with a guided path. Armed with nothing more than mere oil lanterns or candles, they'd wander off the safe routes into totally unmapped passages. Imagine being in a 400-mile labyrinth of identical, twisting tunnels. Total darkness quickly swallowed them. Search parties were completely hopeless, and these lost explorers simply vanished into the pitch-black maze forever. In fact, their skeletons were only discovered by other cavers decades later. Section 2. The Invisible Killers, the Physics of the Underground. Now, caves don't just kill with falling stone. They use invisible weapons, like water. Consider the truly terrifying speed of water inside a cave system. Over in Thailand's Nam Talu Cave, both in 2007 and actually again in 2024, tour guides ignored explicit monsoon warnings and led tourists inside. At minute 0, it's just a peaceful walk. But at minute 20, a massive wall of water, driven by heavy mountain rains outside, surged right through the tunnel. Back in 2007, it was literally a 33-foot-high supersonic whip of water that annihilated almost the entire group instantly. It wasn't until hour 20 that a single survivor, Helena Carroll, who miraculously managed to cling to a high rock ledge in total darkness, was finally rescued. And the thing is, water doesn't just flood, it crushes. This happens through a brutal phenomenon known as the piston effect. When an ocean swell pushes into a sea cave's underwater tunnels, it acts like a giant pump, violently compressing the air inside. In 2021, a tourist named Jasmine Ben Ali entered the crystal-clear water of the El Tangon blowhole in the Canary Islands. An incoming wave suddenly triggered that piston effect, and the water instantly erupted into a violent whirlpool. In under 60 seconds, she was battered to death against the volcanic rock. But bad air can be just as deadly as water. And honestly, it's way more deceptive. Take CO2 narcosis, for example. Deep in the Woodville Karst Plain, an elite diver named Hayden found an air pocket against the ceiling of a flooded tunnel. Thinking he was safe, he removed his regulator to take a breath. But the gas trapped up there was pure carbon dioxide. And here's the scariest part. At high concentrations, CO2 doesn't make you choke or gassed. It literally just switches off your brain like a light switch. Hayden lost consciousness and died in under a minute, sinking to the cave floor with 170 bars of perfectly good air still sitting in his tank. What makes this so uniquely terrifying is the visual, or rather, the lack thereof. Perfectly breathable air looks exactly identical to lethal carbon dioxide or hydrogen sulfide. To the naked eye, they both just look like a shimmering bubble trapped against the cave ceiling. It's a completely invisible, deadly trap. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste the danger until it is already far too late. Section 3. Trapped in Stone, the psychological horror of the squeeze. We're shifting gears now from rapid, violent disasters to the agonizing, slow-burn claustrophobia, where the psychology of survival is really put to the test. This brings us to one of the most heartbreaking cave stories in modern history, John Jones at Nutty Putty Cave back in 2009. While exploring an unmapped section, John got wedged upside down at a 70-degree angle in a crack that was just 10 by 18 inches wide.
By hour 1, he was completely immobilized. For a full day, rescuers desperately built a complex police system in that tiny passage. By hour 24, they actually managed to pull him up just enough to make eye contact. But then, at hour 27, absolute tragedy struck. An anchoring bolt violently ripped from the cave wall. The entire system failed, and John plunged back down. After 27 hours of agonizing confinement, he passed away. Ultimately, the cave was permanently sealed with concrete, and it became his final resting place.
I'm stuck, I can't budge an inch. Those were the tragic words of 20-year-old Oxford student Neil Moss in 1959 after he got wedged in a highly narrow corkscrew shaft in England's Peak Cavern. The incredibly tight space meant rescuers just couldn't pull him out, and over 35 agonizing hours, the carbon dioxide from his own exhaled breath, along with his carbide lamp, slowly built up in that tiny confined space, eventually poisoning him.
And perhaps the most surreal entrapment of all is the 1925 story of Floyd Collins at Sand Cave. Pinned by a remarkably small 27-pound rock, Floyd lay trapped 55 feet below the surface. By day 5, the passage actually collapsed, totally cutting off rescue efforts. And while Floyd slowly died of hypothermia over 17 harrowing days, an actual, literal spectacle occurred right above him. An estimated 10,000 people gathered for what became known as Carnival Sunday. There were vendors selling food and drinks on the surface right above a man slowly dying in the dark. It's just wild to even think about.
Section 4. The Limits of Survival, Extreme Human Will. Let's pivot and look at the almost unbelievable extreme measures humans will take when the rock holds them hostage. Have you ever heard of a Bel Air pocket? It's basically a tiny space where air gets trapped above water in a flooded cave. Well, one of these pockets actually saved the life of a 10-year-old boy in Missouri who had gotten separated from his family. Trapped in a flooded tube, he managed to find a tiny pocket of air. But his survival completely came down to sheer, remarkable willpower. For 24 hours, this young kid stayed perfectly motionless in freezing water. By refusing to panic and just staying still, he conserved his core body temperature and his limited oxygen until rescuers finally found him. Now, when you're trapped in a dry cave, the absolute worst enemy is dehydration. To survive, explorers like Leonardo Perez in Mexico and an amateur caver out in Australia's Nullarbor Plain had to take some seriously desperate steps. Pinned in a stone crevice or trapped by a collapse in extreme heat, step 1 was simply accepting their confinement. Then, to survive days without water and stave off complete organ failure, both of these men had to resort to trapping and consuming their own urine. I know, it is an imaginable, deeply desperate protocol, but it's exactly what kept them alive until they were pulled from the earth days later. But the outcomes in these extreme situations can vary so drastically. While Leonardo Perez miraculously survived 115 hours under those unimaginable conditions, Peter Verhoe's story ended quite differently. Lost in the flooded Stark Fountain caves in South Africa, Peter found a dry ledge in pitch blackness. He survived for an absolutely astonishing 21 days by drinking his own urine. Medical examiners later called his survival a literal biological miracle. But tragically, after 3 weeks of utter isolation, he succumbed to starvation right as rescuers finally located his air pocket. Section 5. The Unsolved Mysteries, the Abyss. We've examined both incredible survival and devastating tragedy so far, but, the most haunting cave stories are definitely the ones with absolutely no resolution. These are the explorers who just vanished without a trace. Back in the 1960s, a guy squeezed into a tight tunnel in the desert's Cave of the Skulls. His friends followed mere moments later, only to find a solid rock wall and their friend entirely gone. In 2010, Ben McDaniel vanished in the Vortex Spring underwater cave, leaving behind only his decompression tanks. Elite recovery divers searched every single inch and found nothing, totally baffling experts. And then in 2014, YouTuber Kenny Veach set out to find the mysterious M Cave in the Nevada desert. He never came back. Searchers only found his cell phone abandoned near a mine shaft. No bodies, no closure. Just scattered equipment left behind for grieving families. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. If the Earth can just swallow us up without a single trace, why do we keep searching for the bottom? Honestly, despite the terrifying physics, the invisible killers, and the agonizing psychological horrors we've talked about today, humanity's unending obsession with the deepest corners of our planet remains as strong as ever. The dark is always going to call to us, and there will for sure always be those willing to answer. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep your curiosity alive, but please always respect the dark.